In the skies over Europe during World War II, German pilots had faced some of the most advanced Allied aircraft ever built. They knew the sound of American bombers. They knew the shape of British fighters. They knew the strengths and weaknesses of almost every aircraft that crossed into German airspace. But then came a machine that confused even experienced enemy pilots. A massive American fighter. A plane that looked too heavy to fly. A plane that seemed too large to compete with the smaller, faster fighters of the Luftwaffe. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. To German eyes, it was almost unbelievable. It was huge. It carried an enormous engine. It had a cockpit filled with unfamiliar instruments. And according to stories from German test pilots who examined captured Allied aircraft, the P-47 cockpit was so different from what they were used to that it could leave even an expert searching for answers. But why? Why would a fighter cockpit, something designed to help a pilot survive combat, appear confusing to some of the most experienced aviators in the world? The answer reveals a fascinating difference between American and German aircraft design philosophies during World War II. Because the P-47 was not built to be elegant, it was built to survive, and that single idea changed the future of air combat forever. When people imagine World War II fighters, they often picture sleek aircraft like the German Messerschmitt Bf 109, the British Spitfire, or the Japanese Zero. These planes were designed around speed, agility, and efficiency. They were smaller, they were lighter. They were built around the idea that the best defense was not getting hit. The P-47 Thunderbolt was different. It was born from a completely different mindset. The United States entered the war with a growing industrial power and a different approach to engineering. American designers believed that a fighter aircraft did not only need to win a dogfight, it needed to survive long missions. It needed to carry heavy weapons. It needed to protect pilots, and it needed to come home even after taking incredible damage. The result was one of the largest single-engine fighters of the entire war. The P-47 was powered by the massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine. This was an 18-cylinder radial engine producing thousands of horsepower. It was the same family of engine that powered aircraft like the F-4U Corsair and later became famous for its reliability. But putting such a powerful engine into a fighter created a problem. The aircraft became enormous. The Thunderbolt looked almost like a small bomber compared to European fighters. German pilots who encountered it for the first time often underestimated it. They thought, how can something this big possibly fight? But they quickly learned. The P-47 was not a slow target, it was a dangerous opponent. The strange cockpit. The cockpit was one of the areas where the P-47 showed its American design philosophy. A German pilot trained on aircraft like the Bf 109 was used to a cockpit designed around simplicity and compactness. Everything was arranged tightly, the controls were close, the instruments followed German aviation traditions. The pilot sat inside a smaller, more confined environment. The Thunderbolt was different. The cockpit was larger, roomier, more like a command station. For a pilot used to European fighters, it could feel unusual. The P-47 cockpit contained many instruments because the aircraft was designed for long-range missions, high-altitude combat, and complex operations. The pilot needed information about engine performance, turbocharger operation, fuel management, altitude, speed, weapon systems, electrical systems. The Thunderbolt was not just a fighter, it was almost a flying weapons platform. And this created a completely different experience. A German test pilot examining the aircraft might have looked around and thought, this is not arranged the way we would build it. The controls were not necessarily worse. They were simply different priorities, different philosophy. Why the P-47 needed such a complex cockpit. To understand the cockpit, you have to understand what the P-47 was built to do. At high altitude, many fighters lost performance. Their engines struggled. Their pilots fought in difficult conditions, but the P-47 had a secret weapon. The turbo supercharger system. Instead of simply using a basic supercharger attached directly to the engine, engineers created a system using exhaust gases to maintain engine power at high altitude. This gave the Thunderbolt excellent performance thousands of feet above the battlefield, but it also created complexity. The pilot had more systems to monitor, more information, more responsibility. The cockpit reflected that. It was designed for a pilot flying missions that could last hours, a pilot who might climb to extreme altitude, a pilot who might fight enemy aircraft. A pilot who might escort bombers deep into enemy territory. Everything had a purpose. The German perspective. German aviation engineering during the war was extremely advanced. The Luftwaffe had some of the most experienced pilots in history. Many had years of combat experience. They understood aircraft design. They understood tactics. They understood what made a fighter effective. But when they encountered American aircraft, they sometimes noticed something unusual. American planes often appeared less refined. They were heavier. They used more material. They looked less delicate, but they had incredible durability. The P-47 represented this perfectly. A German pilot might see the Thunderbolt and think, this aircraft is too big. Then the fight would begin. The P-47 could dive at tremendous speeds. It carried 8.50 caliber machine guns. It could absorb damage that would destroy smaller fighters, and when it attacked, it delivered enormous firepower. The aircraft was not designed to dance, it was designed to hit hard and survive. The cockpit that looked like a puzzle. The phrase that a cockpit could baffle an expert captures something important. It was not that German pilots were incapable, it was that the P-47 represented a different approach to aviation. Imagine stepping into a modern aircraft from another country. Even if you are an expert pilot, the layout might feel unfamiliar. You know what everything does, but you do not know where everything is. That was the situation. The P-47 cockpit had American instruments, American labels, and American design logic. For someone trained on German aircraft, the organization could feel strange, but American pilots loved many aspects of it. The cockpit was comfortable. It had good visibility. The bubble canopy on later versions gave pilots an excellent view. The seat was designed with pilot survival in mind, and unlike many aircraft of the era, the Thunderbolt gave its pilot confidence. Confidence that the aircraft could bring them home. The battlefield test, when theory met reality. Narrator: aircraft designers can spend years creating a machine on paper. Engineers can calculate speed. They can calculate range. They can calculate weapons, but the real test comes when the aircraft enters combat. And for the P-47 Thunderbolt, combat revealed something that surprised many people. This massive fighter was not a mistake. It was a monster. When American pilots first flew the Thunderbolt into combat over Europe, they discovered that its size was actually one of its greatest advantages. The heavy structure that made it look inefficient also made it incredibly tough. The aircraft could absorb damage and keep flying. Bullets could tear through wings. Engine parts could be damaged. The aircraft could lose systems, but many Thunderbolts still managed to return home. This created a reputation among Allied pilots. The P-47 was not just a fighter, it was a fighter that protected the person inside it, and that idea was reflected directly in the cockpit. The pilot experience. For a pilot, a cockpit is more than a collection of instruments. It is where survival happens. Every second matters. During combat, a pilot does not have time to search for controls. Everything must become instinct. A switch, a lever, a gauge, a warning light. The pilot must know where everything is. The P-47 cockpit was designed around a pilot who needed to manage a powerful machine. The aircraft had a huge engine producing incredible power. It had a turbo supercharger system. It had multiple fuel systems. It carried heavy weapons. It operated at extreme altitudes. The pilot was not simply flying. The pilot was managing a complex machine. For someone unfamiliar with the layout, the cockpit could appear overwhelming, but for a trained Thunderbolt pilot, it became home. The difference between German and American design. The Luftwaffe had a different approach. German fighters like the Messerschmitt Bf 109 focused heavily on performance. The aircraft was lightweight, compact, fast. The pilot sat inside a tight environment where every kilogram mattered. The philosophy was, make the aircraft as efficient as possible. The Americans had another philosophy. Make the aircraft powerful enough to dominate the mission. This difference appeared everywhere. A German fighter looked like a precision machine. The P-47 looked like a flying tank. And in many ways, that was exactly what it was. The Thunderbolt was one of the heaviest single-engine fighters of the war, but that weight gave it strength. It allowed the aircraft to carry armor. It allowed it to carry ammunition. It allowed it to survive punishment. Why German pilots respected the Thunderbolt. Early in the war, some German pilots underestimated American fighters. But experience changed their opinions. The P-47 had incredible speed in a dive. It could reach extremely high speeds while attacking. A German pilot who tried to escape by diving could discover that the Thunderbolt was not an easy opponent. American pilots developed tactics around the aircraft's strengths. Instead of trying to turn fight with lighter fighters, they used energy tactics. They climbed, they attacked, they dove, they used speed. The P-47 became a predator in the skies. The captured aircraft experience. During World War II, both sides studied enemy aircraft. Capturing an enemy plane was like discovering military secrets. Engineers examined the engine, the armor, the weapons, the instruments, the construction. Every detail could reveal something about the enemy. When German engineers and pilots examined Allied aircraft, they were often surprised by American manufacturing. The P-47 especially represented American industrial power. It was built with enormous resources. The aircraft was not created with the same limitations faced by Germany during the later years of the war. America could build large numbers of powerful machines, and the Thunderbolt was a perfect example. The myth of the ugly fighter. One of the most interesting things about the P-47 is that many people initially thought it looked wrong. It was too big, too heavy, too powerful. Compared to elegant fighters like the Spitfire, the Thunderbolt looked almost awkward, but history proved appearance could be misleading. The aircraft that looked like a giant became one of the most successful fighters of World War II. It destroyed enemy aircraft, it protected bombers, it attacked ground targets, it supported troops. The Thunderbolt became one of America's most important weapons. The cockpit and the psychology of confidence. A pilot's confidence matters. When a pilot enters combat, fear is always present, but the aircraft beneath them can change that feeling. A fragile aircraft creates hesitation. A strong aircraft creates confidence. P-47 pilots knew something important. Their airplane could take punishment. The armor around them, the strong structure, the powerful engine, the reliable design, all of it created trust. And trust between pilot and machine can decide survival. The secret advantage of size. The P-47's size gave it another advantage. Space. More space meant more fuel, more equipment, more protection, more possibilities. The aircraft could carry weapons that smaller fighters could not. Its 8.50 caliber machine guns created devastating firepower. A short burst could destroy enemy aircraft. Later versions could carry rockets and bombs, turning the Thunderbolt into an extremely effective ground attack aircraft. The same machine that fought enemy fighters could also strike tanks, vehicles, and battlefield positions. The pilot who saw a different future. The P-47 represented the future of aviation. Before World War II, many believed fighters had to be small and lightweight, but the Thunderbolt showed another path. Power mattered, range mattered, survivability mattered. Technology was changing, aircraft were becoming faster, more complex, more powerful. The cockpit that seemed confusing to outsiders represented a new era, a cockpit designed for a machine that was no longer just a simple fighter, it was a high-performance combat system. Final section, the legacy. Today, the P-47 Thunderbolt remains one of the most respected aircraft of World War II. Not because it was the smallest, not because it was the most beautiful, but because it accomplished something extremely difficult. It gave pilots a weapon they could trust. The story of the P-47 cockpit is really the story of different philosophies. Germany created aircraft with precision. America created aircraft with power and endurance. Neither approach was simple. Both created legendary machines. But when the P-47 entered the skies above Europe, it proved something. A fighter did not have to look perfect to be deadly. It did not have to be lightweight to be fast. And it did not have to be elegant to become a legend. The Thunderbolt was big. It was powerful. It was intimidating, and inside that unusual cockpit sat pilots who changed the course of air warfare. Because the P-47 was never just a plane, it was a statement that American engineering, American industry, and American pilots had arrived. The aircraft that looked impossible became one of the greatest fighters ever built.